Welcome to another episode of Expected Buffalo, the podcast, presented by One Pie Pizza, the official sponsor of the podcast. One Pie Pizza, 2185 Clinton Street in West Seneca, open 7 days a week from 9 to 8. So check them out at onepiepizza.com. All right, we are in the Four Nations break. We have 2 weeks off. 2 weeks to, I don't know. I guess we get to see some one-on-one, I guess the way to put it. But the top players play in one-on-one international games for the first time. I mean, besides World Championships, but for the first time in a long time. So I think that in itself will be fun, a cool experience to see a few Sabres guys in it. Rasmus Dahlin for Sweden, Henri Jokiharju for Finland. And then we'll see how many games Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen gets in for Finland as well. You would assume that Saros would be the starter for that team, but we'll see how that plays out over the next week or so. So we're going to get into that at the end. We'll do a quick little discussion about it. I don't have a ton to say, but still we'll kind of preview it at the end here. But I think this is a good time to, 50 plus games in the season maybe isn't the best time, but do a reflection here. This team is where they are, still last place in the East. You ideally would have liked to win on Saturday to take that 5-game winning streak into the break, but that's not the way it goes for this team. They, did their usual struggles and, found themselves losing a game with a couple bad mistakes, not getting saves from goaltenders, and they take a loss into the break. But still, they were playing some decent hockey. They were stringing some wins together. At the end of the day, the mountain to climb is humongous. So even with what they've done, they've only gained a few points here than the people in front of them, and that's what makes the challenge so difficult to even have any consideration of climbing the standings, which we all know at this point is pretty unrealistic. But as I was saying, I think I want to focus a lot of this on today, going through some of the things that I think really is what holding them back this season. Now, there's a lot that we can get into, for a team that's last in the Eastern Conference. There's a lot you can pick apart. You can go to a lot of things, but I think I want to narrow the focus on a few things that I think one or two of these things were better. I'm not saying they would be a playoff team, but I'm saying that they would probably be in a situation where there may be a few points out and it's more realistic. We're having a more realistic conversation instead of sitting here, 54 whatever games through and knowing that this is, we're kind of just hanging out for the next 25 to 30 games. So where do I want to start? Let's start, I think, with the one for me that is the biggest issue on the board and is now an issue for the second straight season. And that is the power play. New coach this year. Well, obviously new head coach. And then you bring Seth Appert in to run that unit this season. So there was some concerns going in. Obviously, you're bringing up an AHL coach who himself did not put together the best AHL power play system down there. You're bringing him to the NHL. Still, you were thinking to yourself, well, it can't be as bad as last year. And granted, it's not as bad as last year, but it's not much better. And I think for them to be in the mix, it needed to at least be average, maybe a little bit below average. And it's just not really in any regard. Their percentage on the season is near the bottom of the league. I think it was like 28th or 27th when I checked this morning. And then the numbers behind it themselves are just not good. They're not generating, they're not scoring. The chances look pretty weak overall when you're watching them. There's still a lot of, 54 games in, there's still just a lot of standing on the outside. Now that has improved a little bit, and we'll get into that as we move along here into this conversation. But still too much standing around. There's not enough quick puck movement. There's not enough quick decisions. There's a lot of indecision. There's a lot of forcing the puck. There's a lot of turnovers. There's even times where there's entry issues getting the power play set up. Um, and it's frustrating because it all feels like things that you should be able to fix. They're correctable problems. And it just has gone on and gone on and gone on. And we sit back here and look. I mean, I don't want to over inflate the impact of it, but I think there's easily we could sit here and say 4, 5 games. Let's go conservatively 4. 4 games. We'll say that maybe if they had a working power play that they could have got a win out. They could have held a lead. They could have tied a game. They could have won a game that it let them down. So if you take those 4 games and you give them 8 points, I mean that puts them 57 up with the Islanders, and that's it's 4 points out of a playoff spot. So I think that is where you measure the impact of it. I mean, there's it's a rough estimation, if you will, but still, I think it's within reason to measure the impact of that unit not working, and it's really disappointing to me that it's mostly the same players too that are given the opportunity on the first unit, in particular because they play the most. I know Dylan Cousins was moved off and he was replaced, but I think it was Zucker who stepped in for him, and that has worked, so that's a benefit. But still, I mean, there's Jack Quinn issues that we see turnovers there. Again, it's just all season long with him. It's been indecision with the puck on his stick, and it's hurt them at 5-on-5, and it's hurt them on the power play. And as much as JJ Peterka is starting to get going at 5-on-5, he's just not at this point in his career a good power play forward. He doesn't really offer you much of a shooting threat. Maybe if you want to make an argument that he's an entry threat, I could listen to that. But I still think there's other players you can go with. Like Yuri Kulik, I think should be given an opportunity to play on that wall on the first power play. He does in the second unit. He scored a couple of goals. He scored a lot of goals in the AHL playing on that side. He's calm with the puck. He has a great shot. It gives you another shooter. When you have Tage out there, Darlene out there, it gives you somebody else who's another shooting threat, and it opens the ice more. Defense have to shade towards him more. They have to, not basically ignore that side of the ice. They're not anymore forcing you, because what teams are doing is essentially they're forcing the puck to Quinn and to Peterka because they're trying to get turnovers, trying to get mistakes, because they know the guys that do it. They scout. They know what players are going to cause those mistakes. So if you can, mix that out, maybe that's something we see happen over the next 2 weeks. I don't know if it's Peterka, maybe it's Quinn, but whatever. It's something that has to be respected. The goaltender has to pay attention to it. And I think, setting up and showing that he has that shot, I think will then open passing lanes, which he is apt to hit as well. So that's just one of the, things that I'd want to look at. I'll give him credit since the holiday Christmas break. It's there was a time when it was starting to get going. It looked better. It improved. I think like their expected goals for per 60 might even been top 10. But looking at it now, it's if we just go straight from December 23rd to right now, the 9th, the last played, that they're starting to drop again. I mean, their expected goals for per 60 over that stretch is 14th. And they were, I believe they might even been top 5. So that's going down. Their finishing ability, their goals for is dropping 2. That was near the top, and that's now all the way down to 20th since the 23rd. So they've had a couple of these stretches where, yeah, your finishing comes through, your production comes through, but it's not sustainable. There's not momentum. It's not gained. And, it's hurt them. And they'll probably finish far enough back in the standings where we can't sit here in April and go, well, power play cost them. The power play cost them an opportunity for the playoffs. While it is certainly going to be a large reason for them missing, I think they might, maybe for Seth Appert's sake, skate by that. It's not the main and sole reason that we can point to because of how far they get back in the standings, because of that 13-game losing streak. So the power play. I mean, it's going to be something that I think what I want to see, because I mean that's kind of part of the conversation too. Is what do you really want to focus on over these next 25 to 20 whatever games to make it interesting? Is see some improvement, see the acknowledgement of some of these things, see some of these things you're doing wrong, and try new things and see if it works or not. Get build going into next year. What can change? What can be better? And I think that's something certainly maybe down the road, or maybe next week or later even this week, we can get into kind of what we want to look forward to the remainder of the season. And that is certainly one of those things. All right. So beyond that, there's a couple of things that I want to get to in terms of I think what their big issues are this season. The next one I want to go to is goaltending. So I want to be careful here because while okay, let's start here. It hasn't been good enough for him this season. So let's just put that out there. He hasn't played well enough. He hasn't played well enough consistently. Don't get me wrong. There's games where he'll go 3-4 in a row where he looks great. He looks like the goalie that we saw last season. But then there's two bad ones, and then there's two good ones, and two bad ones, and three good ones, and two bad ones. Like it's frustrating. And you look at a game, like Saturday, the Sabres should have won. They were the better team, but they couldn't get saves. And I get it. I'll listen to maybe he wasn't 100%, and the coach put him in. It wouldn't be the first time he wasn't ready, and that was part of it. Sure, fine, but that's not the first time that game has happened. There's been other instances this season where he just hasn't been good enough. He's let his team down, and he's the reason they've lost more games. I think, maybe even a split. I guess you could say. The goaltending, maybe not even just Lukin. The goaltending itself, I think has cost them more games than I probably has saved them this season. And it might be close. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's been some good games from Reimer. There's been some good games from Lukin. I don't know. Maybe Levi's had a good game. I can't really recall, but there's been some games for sure, especially out west in California. A couple months ago, when it looked like we were on a journey to being a playoff contender, there were some good goaltending performances out there. But since then, there really hasn't been a lot put together. But I think what the interesting part of it is, if you're somebody on social media that follows and sees that the numbers that I put out, and I can even pull it up here and show for those YouTube viewers that are watching this live as I'm talking here, is it's not really an overall standpoint where you can sit here and say, like, just in every single facet, in every single game state, power play, 5-on-5, shorthanded, that the goaltending is struggling, because that's not really the case. And I think that is maybe what makes it the most interesting about this conversation, is where in particular each goalie has struggled. And I think maybe the most interesting one, and probably the one we should focus on the most, is going to be Luukkonen. And the reason for that is because obviously he plays the most, so he's the one that we should put more of the focus on. But what we're going to see here when I pull this up as I'm putting it all together now, is we're going to see that his numbers at 5-on-5 and are pretty good. Actually, they're over expected, if you will. Net positive numbers, easiest way to say it. Where we're going to see the shortcomings primarily in this chart we're going to look at here is going to be shorthanded. So now I'm pull this up here so everybody can get a look at it. So like I was saying, in all situations, Luukkonen's a net negative. And then going to the next one in the middle here, shorthanded, he is, the worst shorthanded goalie on the team, if you will, in terms of goal save above expected. And then at 5-on-5, he's the best, with Levi being the worst at 5-on-5. So a few things I do want to point out here. As you're going through this, how we're looking at it now, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. How is he a negative 5.62 and that's only a negative 2.78? And the other one is positive up there. The other thing that's not showing, we're not seeing in this chart, is he is I think a negative 2 or 3 in terms of 6-on-5. So facing an empty net, his numbers are pretty poor. And then also he has a negative number 2 on the power play. So that's contributing to the overall number of being a negative 5 where it's at. But what I'm getting to is, we just talked about special teams on the power play. I think the Sabres penalty kill has been pretty good this season when you look at the numbers overall. But you can see here, particularly from Levi and Luukkonen, where they're getting hurt is some goaltending. No, I think it should be said that there's likely, I don't know, a little bit of luck, maybe a little bit of noise in here that's making the numbers look better than they actually are, at least from an overall team perspective in what they're giving up. But looking at this, we could see that Luukkonen's just not giving them those saves at 5-on-5. But from a team perspective overall, their expected goals against while shorthanded, they're 10th in the league at 8.16. So they're top 10 giving up the lowest quality while shorthanded. So overall, that unit has been good, and that's something you want to build upon. Getting back to the goaltending, though, I think that's the fascinating thing when you look at these goaltenders, because it paints a picture of maybe some areas they struggle in. Is Lukin having struggling moving side to side? The one thing that I have noticed this season, and some of the numbers back it up, is he's having a little bit more difficulty with distance shots this season. So shots that are coming from further out, he's allowing in more. So if you translate that back to putting a few pieces of the puzzle together that we just talked about, their expected goals against per 60 is low, which is an indication there's a lot of low quality shots, which you can then make the assumption that there's more shots coming from further distance. And then when you tie that back into the numbers we have over here of telling us that Luukkonen has struggled comparative to the rest of the league with shots from further distance, well, now the puzzle pieces are starting to get together. So I don't know if that's a season thing. I don't know if that's just a Luukkonen thing. You would think a goaltender of his size should be able to see through screens, see over players, and be able to pick up the puck as it's further out. One of the things he's battled with through his career, I think, is making himself smaller at times, which I haven't seen that to be that much of an issue. But that's when you can kind of know he's in a struggle, is when he's crazy in the crease, which he really hasn't been that bad with that, and that's a good thing. Or when he's making himself small in the net. So he's a 6'5" goaltender, but when he makes himself small and he's getting beat high because he's making himself small. I mean, I can think of 2 goals in Nashville for this very reason. The 5th goal was it, and then maybe one of the other goals where he got beat high. I can't remember which one. Again, it's making yourself small in the net. So that all ties into where I think there's some struggles there with Luukkonen. And really, I went into the season and we talked about that. You didn't need last year from him. What you needed was, in that 15 to 16 range in goals saved above expected. Last year he was top 5, and I think that's a tall ask. Where I get it, you would want that to be every season, but there's only 2 or 3 goalies in this league that are consistently performing at that high of a level, and that's a lot of it. That's a big ask. So I just wanted him to be, in the middle range, in the 15, 16, middle among 32, right? Take your 32 starters and whatever. Be in that range, and it's been below that overall, and that has hurt them. I think it's some nights where you just need it from your goaltender. You're having an off night, give me a couple saves. You're having a good night, like, come on, man, I can't have this one go in. I can't have that one go into it. It really felt like Nashville, because that's the fresh in my mind one, is every opportunity ended up in the net. And that's frustrating. It reminded me of the Montreal Canadiens games. The other one we found out later that he was injured in. Every single opportunity ended up in your net. And that was, that was frustrating. That's 4 points right there alone. And we talked about it with the power play. Those are 2 games against Montreal and Nashville that we could just say you just got 1 or 2 saves. That's 4 points added to, especially against Montreal, a team that's in front of you. So I think those 2 things in particular are what I would say, if you really ask me, that's holding this team back. But there is a third that I want to get into, and I think it's pretty important, especially for a lot of the conversations that are going on now with Bo Byram and what to do with him, is the defense build. So Dahlin is playing great. Dahlin and Byram as a pair is going well. Byram has been pretty good too while he's been in that pair. Owen Power, he still continues to have his ups and downs. And that's probably just going to continue for the rest of the season, because that's just the way it's gone for him this year. But once you get past those 3, it's a pretty big drop off, and that's a problem. Matthias Samuelsson has not been probably what you really wanted this year, but again, the injuries, consistently injured, and he is on the shelf again. So we'll see how long that's going to be. Clifton and Bryson, those are not guys that are going to step up and be top four defensemen for you. They've, I guess you could say, been okay for what you've asked. Gilbert is what he is. I don't want to really hate on Gilbert. I think if the more you play him, the more his defensive deficiencies show up. And that's why when he isn't in those 11-7 situations, his minutes are usually near the bottom. But he does serve a role, physical, good around the net. So I think that serves a role in this team, and I'm not going to overlook that. But no, again, it's a certain skill set that he excels at, if you will. There really needs to be a decision on how this team is going to build their blue line. And we're probably not going to know until the end of the season because they're going to see if anything comes up with Byram, if it makes sense. Before they go into the offseason, they have to make a decision on what they're going to do with him. If they're going to give him a bridge, a long-term extension, whatever they decide. So you're either going to be looking for one or two. And we've done this dance with Power since he's come in the league of trying to find somebody that can play alongside him. And the focus just hasn't been on it. They have not. And it's weird because they talk about it. Like, they talk about the importance of it, and then they just have never done it. I mean, maybe you can make the argument that they thought Byram would work there, but it didn't. And I can make an argument that was kind of a silly thing to hope for because you have two pretty similar players that struggle in two the similar things. You would think that that's not going to mesh very well. And then you have two players too that they both seemingly play better on the opposite hand too. So I mean, that again doesn't seem like a match. So that argument starts to fall apart pretty quick. And then everything else you've done, like if you're hoping Matthias Samuelsson would have been that, I suppose. But the injuries, it's before even getting into his play, the injuries themselves cannot be something you rely upon to be a top four defenseman. Not to mention that he's not a top four defenseman. He does not possess the puck skills to play that many minutes and be an effective player. He just doesn't. There's too many turnovers. There's too many missed passes. There's too many mistakes because of his inability to consistently make smart decisions or just move the puck effectively. So really, he's no more than a 5 probably in this league. So it's when are we going to address it? When are they going to take it seriously? Because I think if they don't, if we just keep going along here and we just keep adding these fringe players in, another counter Clifton, if you will, that's not going to be the answer. There needs to be a concrete decision and a concrete move to set a former first overall pick up that you invested in to be in an opportunity where in a scenario or an instance where he can succeed. He is a great player with a lot of skill set and a lot of upside in a big ceiling, but he'll never be able to reach that if you don't give him what he needs in his environment from a defensive standpoint, and then even just taking some of the pressure off. Just, when he's not on the ice, he doesn't have to do everything. Doesn't have to be the one guy that gets the puck out. Doesn't have to be the one guy that carries it. Doesn't have to be the one guy that is effective in the offensive zone. Like, give him some support. Give him something that I think can bring a little bit of the pressure off, and maybe we'll see him start to play with less stress and less turnovers and not forcing things because he feels like he has to. And I get the argument that people are going to make, in terms of making this investment, especially if you're going to keep Byram, well, you're investing a lot of money in your blue line. Even if you keep Byram on a short-term contract, you're probably looking at around $7 million. So $6.5 to $7 million on a short-term deal. And that's on top of the 11.5 that you're paying Darlene, or 11 million, whatever, and the 8.3 they're going to be paying Power. Then if you want a fourth defenseman to head into that mix, I get it. It adds up as a pretty significant investment in your blue line. But it's what you have to do, unfortunately. You get to put a successful team on the ice, and it's what's required. Now, the benefit is you have a salary cap that's going to rise to $95 million. So be a real NHL team and spend it. Improve on your blue line for once. Nashville, again, I keep going back to that game, but really that game just pointed out all of the problems this team has. They all came to light in that game. And if you have a better blue line or a better defense, maybe some of those turnovers don't happen. Maybe some of those plays are broken up. There's not those breakdowns in the defensive zone that guys have clean shots. For sure. Give me one of those. Save one of those for me, please. Bail me out one time. But still, if you can avoid it altogether, that's the way you ideally want to go. So yeah, I hope Adams takes it seriously. I hope that he puts an emphasis and a focus on that. The power play and the goaltending, I think, are what they are. The power play is a systematic thing. The goaltending, your goalie's here. Lukin is not going anywhere. So you just hope those things can improve. Where I think the defense investment or taking the defense seriously finally is really what can help this team, change things to set them up for success, moving forward. The last thing I do want to touch on that I thought was interesting, and I'm not entirely sure what I really want to do with this data yet, because there is a lot of different ways you can go for it, and I'm letting it marinate. Maybe it's something over this 2-week break, or I'll move it into the summer. So I had a really good question come in from excuse me, I'm joking. I had a good question come in from a fan who asked about the breakout of production, like through a lineup. So, in a sense, is the top line carrying this team? And how does that measure up against the rest of the league? Is this team top heavy? Is the scoring split without the whole team? At least, from a forward perspective, is what I looked at, and the results in it were pretty interesting. Like I said, and I don't really know entirely where I want to go with it, but let's pull out a few things out of it that we can briefly discuss here. So I'll go through this entire exercise that I put together. So how I did it, and you can go look my tweet too out there if you want to see it. I wrote it all out there too. But what I did is I went and pulled the top 100 forwards to play at least 100 minutes at 5-on-5. So that works out to probably around like 8 to 10 games, depending on the player. Then I split their time on ice into a games played rate. So then I figured, okay, let's take the top 192 forwards in time on ice per games played. Because if you take top 6 forwards times 32 teams, that gives you 192. So those are your top 6 forwards. Again, not a perfect exercise because like some teams had like 7 guys, some teams had like 5, and it's not perfect, it's not clean. But I think for what I was trying to accomplish here, it worked in the short term. And then the remaining forwards that were in the data set, we just call them bottom 6 forwards. So I calculated out of the top 6 in the bottom 6 group for each team, goals per 60, points per 60, and then I sorted them out. So for the Sabres, top 6 forwards in goals per 60, they came in 10th, and points per 60, they were 16th. Bottom 6 forwards in goals per 60, they were 8th, and points per 60, they were 11th. So we know we have a team here that can score goals, right? I mean, that's I think a 5-on-5, they're one of the better scoring teams in the league. I forgot exactly where they are. They might even be like a top 5. I'm looking quickly. They are second in the league in 5-on. I think they're that high. They're second in the league in 5-on-5 scoring per 60 at 2.82. So this is a team that can score goals and put the puck in the net. So this kind of tells us that. Where I thought it was interesting in particular is when I then took a variance between, okay, I thought, well, I wonder how significant it is of the split between your top 6 and your bottom 6. So then I looked at the variance. The Sabres had the lowest goals per 60 variance between their top 6 and bottom 6 of a 0.01, and the lowest in points per 60 variance at a 0.08. So essentially what this tells us is the scoring on this team is evenly distributed based on time on ice throughout the entire team. So your top line is not carrying you, and your bottom 6 is essentially producing at an effective rate, enough for you to be a competitive team. And I think that's all you can ask for. And I know we beat up on this team, and Adams in particular, on his bottom 6 moves that he's made, and he should be. And Lafferty barely plays. Kubel is in the minors right now. Malenstein, not a second round pick, of course. I think has been the more effective one, and I think honestly has been fine. He's been a good penalty killer. He's played that role you asked him, using speed, getting up on the forecheck, and all of that. So I think if you take away that I paid a second round pick for him, which we can get into debate another time, what is a second round pick worth? How many times does that hit? And what those players usually turn out to be, which is kind of like a third or fourth line player in most situations. We can say that for another time to get into that whole debate. But still, I think, the McLeod addition has been helpful. I mean, that's a player that's on pace for 40 goals. Benson, while he's maybe not getting to the point production that people want, but as a 19-year-old, he's improving upon where he was last year. Krebs has improved upon his scoring rates this year. Not great, but an improvement. And then you have Zucker. I mean, 28 goals, 61 points. Like, I didn't see where he finished, if he was a top six or a bottom six based on the split that we had. Because he has had a lot of top six minutes this season. But still, I mean, let's just say going into the season, he was a middle six forward for you. On pace for 28 goals and over 60 points. I mean, what else could you have wanted out of him? Jordan Greenway was being productive before he went out. So you kind of bring all of that together, and what it tells you is your forward group, while don't get me wrong, needs improvement. Dylan Cousins has underperformed. Jack Quinn has not been good enough. Paterka just got going when he got placed in that top line. But overall, yes, you probably want to make minor tweaks in. If you're going to move Cousins out, you want to bring in a different center. Completely makes sense. But I think if the position groups, when you break it out, and this gets back to the defense conversation, is maybe that is the area we want to put more focus in terms of, if you want to make a hockey trade and you're going to go get Elias Pettersson and with Dylan Cousins and bring him in to improve your forwards, great, grand, wonderful. Yes, please go do that. But I think if you want to use your other assets, your prospects, your picks, your cap space, for God's sakes, use those assets to go get a defenseman. Because this is telling us here that your forwards are not that bad. While we still can admit, like I just said, that it's not perfect. There's things you want to improve upon. Is that your forward group isn't terrible. So you need to put your focus and your attention, I think, into other areas, defense in particular, and that will help you maybe come the farthest in your improvement. And then we can get into the systematic issues that you have with your power play, and then we can get in hopefully finding more consistent goaltending. And a lot of that is just luck and up and down and up and down. We go with that. So those are my things I kind of thought about a lot over the last few days and heading into this break. And what I'm going to kind of let marinate here and see how I want to rip it apart, what I want to dive into, what I want to look at, what players come along with that. And then I think it's a good time too, because now, I think there's going to be some movement we're going to see here over the next few weeks. So how the NHL usually works over the last few years, if you look historically, is this is the time leading up to the deadline over the next 2 weeks or so. And it's convenient that we have the break here. Over the next 2 weeks is where we see a lot of the movement, maybe the next 2 or 3 weeks leading into the deadline. There's not so much that happens on deadline itself, it's there the few days within. We see it in the weeks approaching that. So I think we're at that point now where we're going to start to see some movement here. I think that there's a lot of conversation from what insiders are saying going on in the league. I mean, you can't really trust that because every offseason they say it's the busiest they've ever heard, and then there's like 2 trades. But I think that we're going to see some player movement. I think there's a lot of teams that are looking to maybe get ahead of resets or some contract things that they're going to use now as the opportunity to correct those or maybe take advantage of what is out in the trade market. So we'll see what that means for the Sabres. Are they going to be on it? There's other report today that Pettersson is off the market, so that's not a surprise. And that's kind of been the messaging ever since the JT Miller trade happened that, we can revisit that in the offseason. So it's where do the Sabres go from there? Do they want to explore Dylan Cousins? They want to hold him maybe for that in the offseason? I still think they'll listen. They'll see what's out there. Then what do you do with Bo Byram? What do you do with Zucker? What do you do with Greenway? And what else is out there that you can go do to not only improve upon your team now, but then again in the future? So it's definitely going to be a heavy focus, on top of the stuff I want to get into the next few weeks. Definitely trades are going to be a lot of conversation. It's not going to be a big, huge conversation, admittedly, we're going to get into today, but as we move through the next couple of weeks and the next couple of days, it certainly will be a thing that we look at and consider. Our trade board is going to get an update here probably tomorrow morning. It'll be up. We had 7 players. I believe we're going to jump to like 15 now. So we'll see that update, and then we'll start to get in some players and pull some things apart there. All right. The last thing I wanted to get into here is the Four Nations. So Four Nations face off. As Eddie has liked to say over numerous times, it's 4 nations facing off. Because I don't know why he likes it so much, but he keeps saying it. So 4 nations facing off: Finland, Sweden, U.S., and Canada. Gets underway on Wednesday, and I think, like I said in the beginning of the show here, I think it's going to be cool to see all that. The best players in the league finally represent their country. It's not an Olympics. Completely get it, but still, it's something. We haven't seen this type of thing in years, because in the World Championships, you don't even get that. You don't get these best players going and being a part of it. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be a good mix of hopefully some competitive hockey. Canada and the U.S. will be fun over the weekend. Sweden, Finland's always a nice rivalry, so to see them go at each other, it'll be a good time. I think it's a good breakup. It's something good for fans. I do think it's interesting too, some of the rule changes. So like the 3-2-1 point system. Maybe are they looking at that, pushing that, moving forward into the NHL? That'd be pretty cool. And then they have like the longer overtime session. So that is something that maybe we could see them bring their kind of test things out here. But overall, I'm excited. It's I always, when Eichel was on the Sabres, I was always thought about how cool it would be to see him play for Team USA, on the Sabres. And we unfortunately never got that. But then, like, looking at it, looking today's US lineup, you got the Chucks, you got Matthews, Eichel, all of those prominent guys that we're finally going to see. And this is the first time we've seen this. It kind of put them ahead. Probably the last time was the World Cup of Hockey, whatever they called it, a couple of years ago, when we had Team North America, and that was such a fun tournament. Team North America, Team Europe, U.S., Sweden, Canada, and all that. But Team North America, man, all those young up and comers, Eichel, McKinnon, McDavid was on that team, Goudreau. One of my fondest memories of a hockey game over the last, I don't know what, 10 to 15 years is that Team North America versus Sweden game. I can still just see it in my head, the chaos of that overtime, the Sedins going down, and then the Team North America coming back. And I think one of the Twins went back down again on a breakaway. Gibson makes the save. Team North America comes back down again, and like the announcers, I can't remember who it was between the benches, was like giddy, and you can hear like his voice cracking kind of as he calls it. Such a fun experience. And then, Goudreau picks the pocket of the Sweden defender, gets it to McKinnon, makes a nice move. Team North America wins in overtime. And just what a fun tournament. And I hope that we can see that same thing happen here. We can see some of the stars in the league really stick out, really make a name for themselves in some open hockey. I really hope it's competitive. I hope these guys, don't treat it like an all-star game. And while I understand that some of the, all these players have to go back and finish up an NHL season, and there's playoff races, you got to keep that in mind too. But I hope there's a little bit more competitive besides just a, all-star game effort defensively, and I think it will be. Don't get me wrong. If it's high-scoring games, great, grand, wonderful. I love that. I just don't want it to be a joke defensively. And it's, just whatever. What are we doing? It's pond hockey, pickup hockey out here. So yeah, I'm saying all that. I'm excited, and I can't wait to get it going. In the next couple of days. So, Four Nations, like I said, gets underway on Wednesday, and good time ahead. Okay, 40 minutes. This is I'm pacing myself. It's like a relief pitcher, or it's even like spring training for a pitcher. I was used to doing um, the quick 15, 20 minute podcast by myself, but now it's working myself up to going being able to go 40 plus minutes, and we got there. So we're doing a good job of it. Loosening up a little bit, and it can be difficult when you're by yourself, but the good news is, the majority of the time we record, I'm not by myself. So either Anthony will be here or Eddie talk about the Bandits, which Eddie will be on it on Wednesday. I believe is what we agreed upon to talk a little bit of lacrosse, and we'll get into some hockey stuff too. And then we're gonna getting some guests on here, especially over these next 2 weeks. There's a lot of things we're gonna dive into, but I think getting somebody on here even for 15, 20 minutes to talk about a particular topic, a particular team, or some trade stuff, really over the next couple of weeks, is what we'll start to see happen more and get into this. So this is the third show of this new what's the new way forward essentially we're doing here for this podcast. The first two shows were super successful, so I appreciate everybody for listening and following along on the live shows, and even continued support from just the audio podcasts of the normal way we used to do it. So we're going to make this more fun, more interesting. I know last week I was teasing that the background would be different here, but I had a plan. I'd spent a lot of time this weekend setting up a studio kind of look, and I didn't really like the way it turned out. So we're trying some new things. We'll eventually have that all set, but I want it to be done the right way and not, in a way that I like. I'm a picky person. I want things the way I want them. So we'll keep working away on that, and we'll see that be different there. But yeah, like I said, I appreciate the support. So, subscribe would be great. What do the people say at the end of these? Subscribe, like, comment, all of that. Subscription would be awesome. If you want to like it, cool, great, grand. But subscribe to the YouTube page, and then you can get alerted and be a part of all the fun things that we do have coming forward here. A lot of plans we're going to into the mix and bring to you. All right, 42 minutes. I think I'm talked out. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Is enjoy the 2 weeks off the right word I want to go here? Maybe for some it is, for some it's not. I guess I can go with enjoy the tournament, the Four Nations. Hopefully everybody enjoys the break in hockey while getting a different view. Should be, like I said, numerous times. Should be a fun tournament. All right. Talk to everybody again on Wednesday. Like I said, we will have Eddie on Wednesday to talk about Bandits. Also, we're going to get in some hockey stuff with him too. And I am working on a lease one more person, so we might have a 2 guest Wednesday. So we will talk to you again then. Enjoy the next few days. See ya.